Hello, one and all, to part two of my look at Heroism in the Iliad. I covered books 1 to 8 some months ago, and I have finally gotten time to sit down, cast my eyes through books 9 to 16, which I'll consider as part 2, or Act 2, considering I'm looking at this through a vantage of deciphering the Iliad as a three-part act. And I've taken out some translations, looked at some aspects of heroism, and it's similar to how I did in book 1. And it's just as a reminder of what we had in book 1. We had the plains of Troy as the great leveler. Zeus was really setting out his stall. Zeus, well, I suppose in an essence, Zeus was setting out his stall, but Zeus was really setting out his stall. Just checking that the stream has gone live there. So Zeus was really Homer was really setting out his stall. This is the plains of Troy. These are the actors I'm going to have in it, namely Agamemnon, Achilles, Hector. Hector emerges later in that first act, after we see the decadence of his brother his brother Paris, because he's there to be both a foil to Paris and also a foil to Achilles. And Achilles' rage and pettiness and turning against Agamemnon is going to be contrasted against Hector's loyalty to Troy, even though he senses its doom. By the time we reach book 9, the situation for the Greeks looks desperate, and they're desperately trying to get Achilles to rejoin them. So there is an embassy sent to him at the behest of Agamemnon, who admits the dire situation. Remember, we had earlier with Agamemnon this idea that he has to manage the troops as well, whereas Achilles is looking for Kleos, soul in a sort of solo way on the battlefield, an attainment to get closer to the gods. He himself, of course, is a demigod through his mother Thetis, but he's looking for that Kleos, and he thinks Troy may enable the battle on the plains of Troy may enable that to occur. Agamemnon there's the material wealth. He's also looking for a little bit of Kleos. Let's not go full down what 2004's Troy did, where they had Agamemnon solely lusting after the wealth of Troy. It's there, but it's not all consuming in his character. He has to contend with the practicalities of managing such a large body of men that Achilles can ignore. He ignores those constraints that are on Agamemnon. He doesn't seem to really balance them in the right scales. So we begin with Agamemnon wandering about in complete despair, telling his clear-voiced heralds to summon every man by name to an assembly, but not to call out loud and alert the Trojans. So again, this is the practicalities that Agamemnon has to concern. He has to send out the commands. Achilles simply needs to act on the battlefield, quick-footed Achilles and so on. And that despair that Agamemnon has is the first sort of translation I wanted to get, because we want to grab flavors and translations from the Iliad as well. We don't just want to go through the themes. That can be done everywhere. And I'm using Perseus Tufts, like I did in part 1, where I'll be going through I think I picked out about 6 or 7 parts where I want to get a translation out. This is the Embassy to Achilles painting, which is quite a popular one. But if we head here to the beginning of book 9, using Perseus Tufts, as I showed how to do in the first part, books 1 to 8. And I want to see, well, what is that? What's that Greek word for despair? Because we had some important words. We had kleos, of course. We had kakous, this maltreatment, a vice of almost a spiritual level, which is how Agamemnon performed to the priest of Apollo in book 1. We had machasamenai, the war of words between Achilles and Agamemnon. So there's certain terms I want to keep as I go through it. So I'm looking for what is this despair that overcomes the Greek camps embodied by Agamemnon at this time? So it comes very early in book 9, and it's here on line 9, if you can follow my cursor. Atreides dachai megalou eblomi menos itor. So Atreides, son of Atreus, dachai, that's the crucial word here. This is the despair. And if I click on it again, this is where we get the Perseus explainer. Pain and distress. Achos. So achai is belonging to Agamemnon, so it's his pain and distress. the son of Atreus, his pain and distress is great, megalou, and Bebelemenos is to be stricken with in the heart, Hector, is his heart. So his pain strikes him in the heart. Treidus dechai megalou Bebelemenos Hector. And he also has the camp turning against him somewhat. Diomedes is beginning to do what Achilles has already done, turn against Agamemnon. You know, when you have if you're a general and you're losing the battle, your men will turn against you. Notably, your men of nobility. You said I was a weakling, this is Diomedes, and a coward. Well, if every Greek, young and old, knows how far that is the case. So he's beginning to say, well, you're criticizing me, Agamemnon, but the criticism now should go up to the top. The chief general, the king of kings, herdsman of the people, as he's later called, should bear the brunt of this suffering we're getting inflicted upon us at Troy. So if Diomedes goes the same way as Achilles, Agamemnon realizes he's going to lose the whole trip. So there is the settlement to send an embassy to Achilles, because that will rally the men's spirits. Morale is shattered and needs to be rallied. Nestor, the mediator, before this, proposes a special council. He's the one who has seen it and done it all before. And so he cancels and thus, most glorious Agamemnon, son of Atreus, lord of men, with you my speech begins and will end with you. So you above all must both give and listen to advice and carry out suggestions that others may feel bound to put forward in the common interest. You will get the credit, whatever the proposal. And then Agamemnon realizes where he's going here and says, yes, I am willing, this is the Ryu translation, under Ryu from the 1950s, willing to make amends, to give him limitless compensation. So they're going to offer Achilles the riches of Argos, mainly, which is where Agamemnon rules. I am willing to give him limitless compensation. There we have Agamemnon now has gotten over the petty feud he had with Achilles, dating back from book 1. We'd seen this fermenting anyway, because Agamemnon's been involved in the torment of battle and how it's all gone. Achilles, by staying in the tent this whole time, hasn't exposed himself to all of that. So his reality is still very much stuck in the reality of book 1. Agamemnon's has moved on by now, so he's willing to concede to Achilles whatever he wants in terms of riches. And it is a humility that's not shown in certain depictions of Agamemnon. If the gods permit us to sack Priam's great town, he says, let him come down in with us, and when we are sharing out the spoils, load his ship with gold and bronze to his heart's content, and pick out 20 Trojan women for himself, the loveliest he can find after Greek Helen. So there is that caveat. Helen belongs to my brother Menelaus, that it will not go to Achilles. And so Agamemnon, having done the concession, proved himself to be a leader, and noticing that there's time when you need to make concession, so you can, in this case, is Achilles. We head to Achilles' tent. And Achilles was amazed and sprang to his feet, and this is the scene we see in the painting I depicted. He sends Phoenix, Odysseus, and Ajax, who each give him 3 speeches in turn to try and convince Achilles to rejoin the fight. He's amazed and sprang to his feet, holding his lyre, and came forward from the chair where he had been sitting. Patroclus too got up when he saw the men. Odysseus makes the offer and lays down the stakes. Basically, his speech to Achilles, and it's interesting. I mean, this is what the embassy to Achilles boils down to: 3 different modes of trying to persuade someone to join your fight. Odysseus says, "You can't. Ignorance of how bad it is out there cannot be an excuse." And he says, Hector is running wild, elated, and irresistible. And this is again the pressure of that Kleos is being attained by the enemy. Kleos right now is being attained by Hector, not by you, Achilles, who so seeks it. Hector's running wild, elated, and irresistible. And that was when I went and tried to say, right, well, let's see what sort of Greek terms we had gotten. We had gotten Achai, as in afflicted on him, Agamemnon, that pain and despair in his heart, it's Hector. And so what about this other term, this idea of Hector running wild, elated, and irresistible? What can we actually get from that? And I found it's on book 9, line 238. And again, you can see where Hector comes out here. So again, the colon means we have a natural break here. Hector the mega stenai, his strength. Again, we can confirm that. Strength and might. So Hector de mega stenai blemainon. He's exalting it. Blemainon minatai. And ectaglos or ectaglai, terrible and violent. Ectaglus. So this is what Hector is exulting. Stenai, his strength and might. That's what should be put. That's the key word there, coming from stenos. It's the accusative, or it's the dative, I believe. His strength, basically, the strength of Hector. So his strength, and then he's also inhabiting some, not just merely strength and might, but an actual rage and a fury, which was translated as, that's where Ryu got the translations such as wild and elated, irresistible. That's what's bearing down on Achilles in this embassy. And then the gods are with him. That's another important thing. The gods at this moment are with Hector. And Zeus seems to know that the whole plan is going to go out. But to the Greeks on the field, they see the gods with the man who has that strength, that might. And the retort of Achilles is an equally famous one. The same death awaits the man who does much and the man who does nothing. This is how he is justifying to himself his idleness. And if we look at that, that's near line 320. So kathanomus otegros anoroto apollo polla eogros. So this eogros is to do, or eorgus, apologies, polla, of course, coming from like poly, so many. Katan is to die away and to be dying. So katan homus, nevertheless, basically. Death, nevertheless. To the person who, otte, to him who is idle. Agros. Anir otte, or to whom, pola yorgos, or he who does much. So that's the Achilles retort in this petty attitude he has in the embassy, book 9. So he's wallowing in self-pity, and he's too attached also to earthly comforts. For nothing, as I now see it, equals the value of life. It's strange. He's both. It is more a pettiness than the earthly comforts, but his speech gives it out. Because if he was simply after material gains, then Agamemnon's idea of the wealth should persuade him, Achilles, at this point. But it doesn't. But neither is he going to be bought in by the appeals of Odysseus, Phoenix, and Ajax to join the battle. Nothing as I now see it equals the value of life. This is Ryu's translation. Not the wealth, they say, prosperous Ilium possessed in their earlier days when there was peace for the coming of the Greeks, nor all the treasure piled up behind the stone threshold of Phoebus Apollo in rocky Delphi. Cattle and fat sheep can be lifted, tripods and chestnut horses can be procured, but you cannot lift or procure a man's life when once the breath has left his lips. Of course, this is all pertinent to the fact that it is the other man in the tent who will die first, his friend Patroclus, which is how this act in book 16 will finish. That's how this book 9 really is the beginning of this second act, because it's the reintroduction of Achilles and Patroclus. So the embassy fails. Achilles has hardened over his once noble heart, they say. And they try to give him a story of Meleager, other people who were in situations like this. I won't go into the detail now, but there's a reply to Phoenix. The Olympian-bred Phoenix says, Achilles, my dear old friend, I have no need of Greeks' honor. I believe I'm honored because Zeus decrees it so. So his once noble heart is hardened, is the conclusion these three take from it. He'll fight when his heat tells him to, and the gods move him. Is just after line 700 of Book 9, kind of the closing remark of what occurs to this embassy. So it's a failed embassy, and they have to go back to Agamemnon and say this has failed. And what Agamemnon then decides to do occurs in Book 10. He sends Odysseus and Diomedes on a night raid. Agamemnon, shepherd of the people, that phrase used again, which again I looked up here. This is the depiction of the night raid in Book 10, where we're examining a little bit of heroism, not the grand heroism of the 24-book Iliad, which deals with Hector and Achilles and Patroclus and all this. There's a little side quest, sort of rendezvous, a reconnaissance mission by Diomedes and Odysseus, but it's a little vignette of heroism, how to perform, because you can compare their duty, how they perform, against the Trojan side, and I'll get to that in a second. But first of all, Agamemnon sends them out, and he is decreed as shepherd of the people. And I think I should get out what that line is, because it's reused a couple of times. It's a poimena laun, and it should be right there. That's the Agamemnon poimena laun. So describing him as a shepherd of the people. That's an interesting phrase. It's used again and again. Sometimes it's used for Achilles later on, which is an interesting change. But it must have just been a common phrase that Homer and the likes could have whittled out so it could fit the dactylic hexameter fairly comfortably. But we'll stick to this picture of Book 10 and the night raid for now. So what is this juxtaposition between Diomedes and Odysseus on the Greek side, the Achaean side, and the character that comes forth from the Trojan side? We'd already said in Book 3, Paris was decadent. Symbol of Trojan decadence was their wealth, their gilded armor. And as the battle commenced in that first, books 5, 6, 7, blood would come spewing out through the armor. Was an indication of the reality of death on the decadence of Troy and the riches of Troy. And we get it's a kind of another insight to that. Nestor again is the one who trusts Odysseus and Diomedes, which is interesting. And before they go, so this is the first exhibition of their correct heroism, as opposed to the incorrect heroism we see on the Trojan side. They pray to Athena. So they prayed in Pallas Athena, we see. Before they sent out. They know it's a dangerous mission. So they pray, and Pallas Athena heard them. So it's not to say they're completely innocent. The Greeks, mainly through Odysseus here, are seen as wily. And then the Trojans, Dolon is the figure that Dolon, in complete ignorance, passed them at a run. Dolon, the man sent out by Hector, stopped, and when he heard the footsteps behind him, imagining they were friends coming in from the Trojans to turn him back because Hector had changed his orders. So again, there's this, Dolon is sent out to kind of do a similar thing on the other side. But he is expecting Hector to call him back. And he thinks that Odysseus and Diomedes, having already passed him by, are the Trojans calling him back. That's the first mistake from Dolon's side, because there's obviously a part of him that wants to go back, does not want to do the reconnaissance mission. Whereas Diomedes and Odysseus have made the prayer to Athena, and she had heard them. It's a sort of a commitment to the course of the night. And so he really has rich and cowardly decadence. Gets caught by these two. He says, "Take me alive, and I will pay my own ransom. I have bronze and gold and wrought iron at home. I was a fool. Hector deluded me against my better judgment by promising me the horses and bronze inlaid chariot of noble Achilles." So why is this? This is painful to read, because we're sort of siding with Hector. We don't like it when Dolon criticizes him here. Right now, we've just seen the embassy to Achilles, and we certainly don't want to be on his side, that petulance, that self-pity. So it's discouraging when we hear this from Dolon, this quick turn on Hector. Anyway, the events of the night turn out that Dolon leads Odysseus and Diomedes to get the rich horses they kill him anyway. They kill Dolon anyway, right? He just tells them how to get some rich horses by another Trojan. I'll try to find his name here. Rhesus has some famous horses, and they take them from him. So they're victorious, and overall, this is a little vignette, as I said, and it's the prayer to Athena versus the want for mammon. The horses end up with those who made the prayer to Athena, and Athena listened. So then we move on to book 11. Achilles again starts to take notice of how bad the battle's getting. He's been awakened to this idea. And here we have a couple of works by Dutch artists, early 17th century. I think it's Crispin van der Rie or something like this. Because books 11 through to 15, these wood carvings are the most of I saw. There was abundance of paintings for the embassy of Achilles, and there'll be abundance of paintings for Achilles reacting to Patroclus's death. But in between the two, there's not too much going on in terms of Western art. Certainly online. So we're on to book 11, and the tumult of battle really resumes. The tumult of battle filled the air that early morning. Achilles notes Agamemnon's actual leadership as well, which is kind of crucial. And this is lines just short of line 150 into book 11. And all the while, Lord Agamemnon shouting, the Greeks followed up and killed. And Achilles is there on the side taking note of this. So he's beginning to witness leadership. Perhaps it's twigging with him that Agamemnon has moved on. Even Paris at this point has overcome his early pathetic scene in book 3 when he loses to Menelaus and Aphrodite brings him out of it in a mist. He's there and he manages to wound Diomedes at this point. So we're seeing a lot of people overcome earlier petulances, and more Achilles is the only one who's still stuck in the rut. It's an indication also of a turning tide. If Paris is wounding Diomedes, the gods truly must be with them. It's the panic setting into the Greeks. And then as the panic does set in, as book 11 unfolds, we get another call on the rulers and leaders to stand fast. Ajax, in these few books, makes a particularly heroic stand at the ships, which we'll come into next. But there was a call on the rulers and leaders of Greeks to also stop a rout, not a rout on a battlefield, but all of the lesser, more commoners of the Greeks and Achaeans and etc. to all head back and leave the shores of Ilium, because it was at the beginning of book 2, if people recall. Agamemnon had the destructive dream sequence, and he sent panic into his own men. Similar, back then they relied on speeches of the likes of Odysseus. We're sort of in a similar situation again. The acts of heroism we see in the Iliad are very clearly falling on hierarchical lines, from the nobility all the way up to through the demigods into the sphere of kings and then gods themselves. So there's just another indication of that. Also, they fight on with the blazing fire. There's a bit, Ajax rails them back a bit. Yet Achilles, great warrior that he is, feels no concern or pity for the Greeks. This is them now talking amongst each other. Is he waiting till, in spite of all we can do, our ships go up in flames beside the sea and we turn in and are destroyed? So now, beginning of book 9, before Agamemnon sent the embassy to Achilles, if you recall, people were turning against Agamemnon. Now that's turned the other way, because the embassy has been offered to Achilles and he's refused. And we have a fateful meeting. This is around line 800 of book 11, where Nestor meets Patroclus, and he begins to insert the idea into Patroclus that he can take Achilles' shoes if need be. The Trojans have fought, so Nestor suggests Patroclus return, which will happen, of course, in book 16. The Trojans have fought to the point of exhaustion, and you being fresh, this is Nestor to Patroclus, well, drive them back to the town from our ships and huts. So he spoke, and his words went straight to Patroclus's heart. Sort of the closing point of where we are at book 11. But that'll have to stew for a while. It doesn't take hold immediately. And we move on to book 12, where Hector storms the walls of the Greek camp. Trojans believe now that they'll win. And this is the beginning of sort of an idea that Hector has a hubris in him that's developing. When you believe the gods are with you, it does not mean they will stay with you. Think of Ixion on the wheel, fortune. Wheel of Fortune turning is like Ixion turning on the wheel in hell. They thought that the Greeks could not stop them now. This is just short of line 130, book 12. But would be slaughtered beside their ships. Slings and arrows of outrageous misfortune comes to mind. There's a council and there's a decision making at the heart of all good storytelling, and we have another one such here. I believe it's Polydamas to Hector, right, about whether they should push it all the way into the camp. We ought not to advance and fight the enemy around his ships. I know exactly what will happen, and if that bird of omen does not lie, this is Polydamas to Hector. Just as we are going to move forward, an eagle flew high across the front of the army from right to left with a blood-red snake in its talons. It's an impact of good storytelling that Hector still, despite this, now the gods have this, Zeus has this plan, that there's this moment where Polydamas is in council with Hector and there's a distinctive decision to be made. Do you push them all the way? Because the point is, let's recall in Plutarch's Life of Themistocles, when they have pushed, then they pushed the forces of Xerxes out from the Battle of Salamis. They could have chased him all the way back to the Straits, isn't it, into Asia Minor, but near modern day Gallipoli. But they decided not to, because Aristides counsels Themistocles and said, we were the wounded bear or tiger, whatever. We were the one in the corner at Salamis that had to have our backs to the wall and had to act. If you push him all the way, they'll act like that, with their backs to the wall. So it's better to kind of be a bit slower maybe and sap the morale out of them, and then only go in when there's nothing left, so to speak. But Hector wants to go in entirely. The Ajaxes, as we said, are lead holdouts at this point. And there's a little point, Sarpedon has a little bit on heroism, which I believe is, considering we're talking about heroism in the Iliad, is worthy of discussing here. Just to note it. Sarpedon on heroism. Book 12, line 310, starting line 310. Glaucus, why are we most of all singled out for honor at home in Lycia, pride of place, choicest meats, and never empty cups? Why do they all look up to us as gods? Why do we cultivate a great estate on the banks of the river Xanthus, lovely orchards, splendid fields of wheat? All this now obliges us to take our places in the front ranks of the Lycians and fling ourselves into the flames of battle. When then will our Lycian men-at-arms say of us, well, these are no dishonourable lords of Lycia that rule over us and eat fat sheep and drink the best sweet wine. They are indomitable and fight in the forefront of the Lycians. These are little paragraphs where they're almost needing to remind themselves why they're there, why they're fighting. This is less chaos with the gods. This is the pressure from below. So we say that these are sort of elites, elite fighters, nobility, proto-nobility. Chaos, you can think of a string being pulled from above you, that you need to stand up and achieve greatness. This aspect that Sarpedon talks to Glaucus from the Trojan side is from the pressure from below. That's not to say that it's well, it's vulgar in that it comes from the people, but it's not vulgar in the sense that it's distasteful. It's equally as natural that you need to show the men at home that you're not just the guy eating the sheep and hoarding the food in the Great Hall. When the backs are to the wall, when there is an invasion, you have to step forward, bear that responsibility. But Glaucus is wounded. And Hector's decision going for the camp, he's kind of gone too far now and he has to go all the way. And book 12 ends with Hector smashing the gates. It's interesting, this is the end of book 12. This is the halfway marker in the Iliad. And it also, Hector smashing the gates, deciding to enter the ships, is sort of a Janus itself. It's a gateway in terms of the plot and in terms of the development of the characters. The opening of the doorway to his doom, in a sense. So we move on to book 13, which is the Battle of the Ships. Book 13 is the Battle of the Ships, and of course, when you're at the ships, you're beginning to leave the domain of land, you're nearer to sea. And so, God, Poseidon, starts to enter the fray here, and he wants to help the Greeks. Which we can see here. This is them this is at the gates. The Greeks at the gates. And then this is Poseidon coming from the sea to help the Greeks and push the Trojans back. Book 13. Ajax is, Poseidon comes to speak to Ajax in a veil of disguise. It's always a bit ambiguous as to how much anyone believes or unbelieves, whether it's Poseidon, whether it's a god in front of them, whether it's some man. But anyway, he's testing Ajax, son of Telamon. And, are you going to fight? Would you fight Hector if he showed up in front of you? And said, I'd be happy to meet Hector, son of Priam, in all his implacable determination. I thought that was another term I would have wanted there. You'd already had Hector's strength and might. That was in the phrase of book 9. Book 9, line 238. Hector de mega stenai, his strength, his might, blemainon, exulted. Now we want to see, what's Ajax's description of Hector is his implacable determination. And so we're on to book 13, line 80. And it comes as Hector. We have it here, line 80. It's the very last line here. Hectori pliamidi amaton memauti machastai. Machastai, of course, being to fight. But really is Hector, son of Priam. Hector Priamidi. Amaton is sort of insatiable or incessant. Amaton memoti, strive to yearn, to desire, to fight. So yes, I'd be happy to meet Hector, son of Priam, in all his implacable determination, is how Rio decided to translate that line. Yeah. And Poseidon continues to rally troops. More battle. Yeah, I think we have Idomeneus killing Alcathous. We have questions like, what can a man do, however committed, is not fight beyond his ability? And we begin to see that with certain deaths. Of course, the wider plot point of what we're doing here, Hector is ultimately fighting beyond his ability because he's going to provoke Patroclus and ultimately Achilles. And it's interesting at this point that line, which comes in book 13, line 237, is Paris counseling Hector. What a man cannot do, however committed, is fight beyond his ability. And so, really, I think we enter book 14 from there. It's a strange one, book 14. We get a little bit away from the main plots of what we're looking for when we're looking for heroism in the Iliad. It's Zeus outmaneuvered by Hera, where she lulls him into a sleep and tries to get the Greeks to gain victory, which of course is too early for what Zeus intended. Zeus needs Hector to go right to the limit, so it's sort of like a pushback. So the plot doesn't happen too early in a weird way. I think I have a picture of that. This is Hera lulling Zeus to sleep in book 14. There's panic in the Greek camp. Seniority does not matter in certain lines. What are you doing here? And it's interesting that these sort of lines, seniority does not matter now. What are you doing here? These are associated with panic. These are associated with breakdown of order. And you can say a breakdown of the proto-nobility and heroism as displayed in the Iliad. Poseidon heartens Agamemnon, and Hera plans to seduce Zeus. You get about 100 lines before you get into this main plot point of book 14. You could see it as a bit of womanly deception, that trope. Aphrodite gives Hera a magic charm that sort of helps little Zeus to sleep. I think it's just an interesting aside that changes the pace of it a little bit. So it's not just complete battles on the plain of Troy. It's a scene setting. It's a sort of changing of the pace of plot. So then when we get back into books 15 and 16 to close out Act 2, we feel a little bit more refreshed, really. I think that's mainly what's going on with this lulling. And we have, wounded as they were, the leaders themselves, Diomedes, Odysseus, and Agamemnon, they prepared their men for the struggle, nevertheless. So this is, the Greeks get a little bit of a fight now, because Zeus was willing Hector on, now he's not. Sort of like a lightning flash. No one may engage with Poseidon in battle, and men shrink from him in terror. So Poseidon's with Hera on this. But neither the thunder breakers on the beach, driven from the deep by a stinging northerly gale, nor the roar of flames when fire attacks the forest and the mountain ravine, nor the call of the wind in the high foliage of the oaks when it rises to a scream in its wrath is so loud as the terrible war cry that the Trojans and Greeks raised as they fell upon each other. And we enter book 15. The Greeks at bay, as the Penguin Classics Reader translation calls it. I mean, these books didn't really have titles. They were later placed into these separate books, I believe, in the Alexandrian age. Zeus basically wakes up and he was put down on Mount Ida beside the battle, which is the picture you see here. He wakes up and he sees that the situation's not what he wanted. Hector gets wounded, breathing in some discomfort, coughing up blood. That's how book 15 begins. Still dazed, since the man who had hit him was by no means the feeblest of the Greek ranks. So ultimately what we see at the beginning of book 15 is Zeus regaining control and back to the original narrative. The Hector-Achilles showdown, which must occur via Patroclus. You must bring Hector really to the utmost cusp of glory of Kleos and then deny it to him. Because you have to have a formidable foe in order to attain Kleos. It's not meant to be something that's easy. I think that's why, to a certain extent, we see the tragedy of Hector. We must make Achilles feel loss also. We can't have Achilles not do it without his sacrifice. And this, we have this beginning of sacrificial heroism. Of course, we'll come down to the Bible eventually, but we're seeing seeds of this sort of stuff. With Hercules, the heroism in Hercules who precedes Achilles, or Theseus, this is not there to the same extent. Hercules' downfall ultimately comes from a sort of familial setting. It's almost a Greek civilizational understanding of post-dramatic stress. You see that in Euripides and much later Seneca's plays on Hercules Furens, Hercules Insane. He completes his labors and then kills his family in a rage. That's not the sort of sacrificial heroism that we're beginning to see here with Achilles, where he needs to see the death of Patroclus because that spurs him on. In certainly how Euripides tells the Hercules story, it's meant to be a horror to a certain extent, where that's why it's a drama. It unfolds and on the Attic stage as a horror, because everyone knows horror is going to come and he's going to snap. Similar thing will happen to Ajax, which is why Sophocles will do a similar tragedy on Ajax. You don't have the same thing with Achilles because it's not a horror. It's more just a sacrifice, a feeling of loss before he can attain his kleos. Zeus breathes new energy into Hector, and he understands sacrifice and fate. He lets his own son Sarpedon fall as well. Zeus is in on the sacrifice. He lets his own son Sarpedon fall, which during book 15 we see him struggling with, but he knows he has to do it. Hera admits that it was idiocy to have quarreled with Zeus, and so the gods ultimately, by the end of book 15, are so united on Zeus's plan. Zeus equals order. That's sort of what you can get out of book 15, if not justice. Apollo will help Hector, and Patroclus leaves the injured Eurypylus. Right, Eurypylus was this injured Greek who came to Patroclus and helped him. Nestor planted the seed of Patroclus helping and joining the Greeks, and Patroclus seeing the injured Eurypylus is what sends him over the edge. Say, right, I'm going to do it. There's a line by Eurypylus when he's lying there next to Patroclus, and he says, Patroclus says to Eurypylus, he gets it. He gets the point, basically. Eurypylus, I can't stay here with you any longer, however much you need me. It's critical out there. So it's reached that critical point, and the words that Nestor had way back in book 11 to Patroclus are now coming to the fore. And this is the state of Hector as we close out book 15. It's very interesting. We said he's getting like a friend. He's now the one working up a frenzy. Hector calls for fire. There was foam on his mouth. His eyes flashed under lowering brows, and his helmet swayed menacingly on his temples as he fought. Zeus himself was Hector's ally in the sky, selecting him alone from that great crowd of men for honor and glory, since he had but a short time to live. That's another concept of the heroism. The closer you come to your doom, the higher your glory. But it will be transient. Certainly in the domain. It will be transient in the domain of you living through it. But it'll be everlasting in terms of its legacy after you're gone. Hector, bring fire, mass, and charge. This is the day worth all the rest when Zeus allows us to destroy their ships. And that's right at the ending of book 15. The line that where you can see Hector now, but he begins to forget that Zeus is more subtle than that and can change the tides of battle. Now we enter book 16, the death of Patroclus. Interestingly, there was more depictions, as I said, of Achilles reacting to Patroclus than Patroclus himself. But we can see here one that sufficed. I believe this is Apollo coming for Patroclus. Oh, apologies. No, this is Apollo. This is book 15. This is Apollo aiding Hector. This is a wounded Hector. The Patroclus image is here in the tumult of battle getting stricken. You can see there it does have book 16 in the top left. So it is actually the Patroclus death scene. Patroclus comes upon Achilles weeping hot tears, is how book 16 begins. And again, I have that in translation. Book 16, line 3. Dacrua therma cheunus. Right here. Dacrua therma, the hot tears. Therma, of course, being like anything thermo. Cheun, I believe, must be the weeping. They're pouring, right? So that's where the weeping is coming from. And us is just his. It's in belonging to Achilles. We've established Patroclus to Achilles in line 2 was established that those are Achilles' tears. His criticism of Achilles' inaction cuts deep, basically, at the beginning of this book 16. And it's the criticism of a friend. This is, again, the idea of exploring heroism. We're exploring also just concepts of performance on the battlefield. Criticism from the ally is what stings. Not if Agamemnon at this point had come and to criticize Achilles, that's not going to work. But when Patroclus says it, that hits home. God preserve me from the bitterness you harbor, is a line Patroclus utters to him. And there's a slur of disinheritance. Peleus was not your father, or Thetis your mother. I mean, these are going to be the parting words. Well, there's a little bit of reconciliation, as we'll see, but overall, it's quite a sour final confrontation Achilles has with Patroclus before he leaves to his doom. Trojans have fought to the point of exhaustion, and I, being fresh, might well drive them back to the town from our ships and huts. I was wrong in supposing a man could nurse his anger forever. This is Achilles realizing he has to do something, though I had intended to do so until the tumult and the fighting reached my own ships. Arm yourself then in my famous battle gear and lead my warlike Myrmidons into battle. So Achilles allows Patroclus to lead it. It's weird. He says, yeah, well, I was wrong in supposing a man could nurse his anger forever. But then he doesn't take up the arms himself. He gives it to Patroclus, which again is, he deserves his loss in his own, like, it's cruel on Patroclus in its own sense, but Achilles deserves the loss because he has refused to accept leadership there at the crucial juncture. And the chaos is undeserved. These are his words to Patroclus. I want you to win me great honor and glory in the eyes of all the Greeks, so that they give my lovely woman back to me and provide splendid gifts as well. I mean, this is outrageous stuff from Achilles. I want you to don my armor and go out and win me the Kleos. But of course, that's not how it's going to work. You're going to have to do it yourself. The only weapon of matchless Achilles he did not take was Achilles' long, thick, heavy spear. No Greek could wield it but Achilles. Patroclus gives the response Achilles should have, basically. Achilles went off to his hut. We're about book 6, line 220. The lid of the beautiful inlaid chest with his mother's silver-footed Thetis had packed tunics, windproof cloaks, and thick rugs put on board ship for him to take on his journey. In this he kept a lovely cup from which he alone drank the sparkling wine. Again, this is a sign of, just dulling his senses rather than sharpening his spear, which he himself used for libations to no other god but the father Zeus. Grant him victory. This is Achilles giving a libation, a prayer for Patroclus. Grant him victory, far thundering Zeus, and fill his heart with daring, so that Hector finds out whether my attendant knows how to fight on his own, or whether his hands rage invincibly only when I throw myself into the grind of battle. Let him come back to me here. Zeus, wise in counsel, heard him. One half the father granted, not the other. Again, we're thinking about tropes. Agamemnon had the Destructive Dream book too, which I elaborated on. Is good trope, whatever. This is a very good one as well. The prayer that is sort of half answered, or else comes to fruition in an unforeseen manner by the prayer maker. Sort of strange will of the gods sort of thing. It's a good plot point. Make wider ruling Agamemnon, son of Atreus, realize the delusion. So we still have this pettiness. Delusion he's under and giving no respect to the best of all the Greeks. Patroclus gives the response Achilles should have right here. So Patroclus spoke, put fresh heart and courage into every man, rather than, there's the juxtaposition. Patroclus is putting the courage into every man. Achilles is still transfixed upon one man, Agamemnon, the wrong he did to him. But when Patroclus gets into the battle, we begin to see why, at the moment, Patroclus is doing everything right. Why is he going to be punished by a death? It's quick in developing, but there is this moment where Patroclus chases, of course he is fresh, right? He chases the Trojans with slaughter in his heart, which I tried to look for. It's book 16, line 372. And it's Svedanon is the word that is actually used there. It's not slaughter in his heart. That's a sort of elaboration. There's just one word, Svedanon, which is a vehemence. But it's an interesting concept, Patroclus's Svedon is what leads him on to go too far, to fight Hector. And it was Hector he was after, and Hector he yearned to kill. There's this weird point I just want to say on the fall of Sarpedon, where destiny seems to act above Zeus. At this whole time, Zeus has known fate playing out. He really doesn't want Sarpedon to die. It's just, perhaps someone can mention in the comments below, what is the sense of destiny that's acting above Zeus? Is it just an even more primordial idea that Zeus is subservient to some concept, dark chaos? But it's not dark chaos because it's ordained. So it's just interesting as to what's really going on there in a theological point of view. Patroclus foolishly pursues into the fight. I mean, there's a ton of, was it Sarpedon Glaucus mirrors, the fall of Sarpedon is a Sarpedon Glaucus mirror of book 13, I think, where one is body is helping the other out of a bad situation. Patroclus kills Sthenelaus, another sort of major player for the Trojans. Zeus makes a coward of Hector, and Patroclus then foolishly pursues because Hector makes everyone fall back. Patroclus with a shout of the charioteer Automedon. Let's go back to the scene. We have a charioteer here. Book 16. Automedon is the charioteer. Went in pursuit of the Trojans and Lycians. He was completely deluded, the blind fool. Blind fool at this point, Patroclus. Apollo warns Patroclus. It's not that he doesn't get warnings. Back, Olympian-born Patroclus, the town of proud Trojans is not destined to be captured by your spear, nor even by Achilles. And Apollo urges on Hector. Hector, why have you stopped fighting and neglected your duty? I wish I were as much your better as you are mine. You could catch him yet, and Apollo grant you victory. Hector seems to rely upon the will of the gods a lot. In this sense, you see him more as the man being played on by the gods, whereas Achilles has that demigod nature. He was able to send Thetis, his mother, to counsel Zeus, to aid the Greeks in the battle. Patroclus then, with murder in his heart, leapt on the enemy like impetuous Ares he was. And we saw Ares earlier on, and I think it was book 5 or 6. That sort of madness. Ares encapsulates the madness of battle. There's not necessarily a good strategy there. In the heart of the battle, Phoebus encountered you, and Phoebus most terrible. Patroclus had not seen him coming through the mayhem. The god had wrapped himself in a thick mist for this meeting. Zeus granted to Hector to wear, since he was very close to death, was the armor of Achilles. And then I think that's Phoebus aiding Hector to kill Patroclus in our image there. That's what's going on. A fatal blindness then overtook Patroclus. So that's a nice little... I tried to look that up. I couldn't find there being a same Greek word for in both instances, but Ryu has twinned it there. He has said, but before that, it was a deluded blind fool was Patroclus in pursuing, going so close to the town, getting Hector to turn around, stop the rout. And now it's a fatal blindness that takes over Patroclus. Overcome by the god's bow and Euphoberus' spear, Patroclus began to retreat into his own contingent of warriors to avoid death. When Hector saw the great-hearted Patroclus wounded in retreat, he made his way towards him through the ranks, and coming up, he stabbed him with his spear in the lower belly, driving the bronze clean through. Patroclus then meets his doom. And we have a mocking finish by Hector. But of course, we know what will happen in the final third, which I'll elaborate on. The final Hector-Achilles showdown we'll look at its own part. Patroclus, says Hector, to close out book 16, you probably thought you'd sack our town, make Trojan women slaves, and ship them off to the land of your fathers, you innocent. Hector, Hector, the finest spearman of the war-loving Trojans who stand between them and the day of slavery. Hector, boast loud and long. This is the fading words of Patroclus. Boast loud and long while you can. Zeus and Apollo handed you that victory. They conquered me. You too, I swear it, have not long to live. Already you stand in the shadow of death and inexorable destiny. Slaughtered at the hands of Achilles, the matchless son of Peleus. So there's like this portent vision of Patroclus just as he's dying. Automedon was carried out of his harm's way by his speedy, immortal horses and the splendid gift that Peleus had received from the gods. Thus closes the examination of Heroism, the Iliad, from books 9 to 16. Hope you enjoyed that, and we will eventually complete this. So, till the next time.